The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, though in the vast emptiness of space, such Earth-based measurements of time seemed almost quaint. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the monitoring station Vigilant Eye, her coffee growing cold in her hand as she stared at the display screen. The transmission had traveled for 3 months through the cosmic void before reaching humanity's furthest listening post. "Play it again," she ordered, setting down her mug with trembling fingers. The communications officer, a young man named Marcus, touched his console. The bridge filled with an alien voice, translated by their advanced systems into broken but understandable English. The voice carried desperation that transcended species, a universal cry that made every human on the bridge stand a little straighter. "To any who hear this message, we beg for aid. The Karathi Empire has come to our world. They demand our surrender, our resources, our children for their armies. We are the Zalani, a peaceful people. We have no weapons capable of defending against their fleet. In 7 solar rotations, they will return for our answer. We know not if anyone listens, but if you hear us, if you have compassion in your hearts, please help us. Our coordinates follow this message. We are afraid." The message ended with a string of numbers that the navigation computer had already translated into a location, 800 light-years away. Not close, but not impossibly far either. Sarah picked up her coffee again, took a sip of the cold liquid, and grimaced. "Marcus, send this to Earth immediately. Priority 1. Direct to United Earth Command." "Yes, Commander." Sarah walked to the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the bridge. Beyond the reinforced glass, stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Somewhere out there, a species she had never heard of faced extinction. The Karathi Empire was known to humanity, though they had never made direct contact. Intelligence reports painted them as aggressive expansionists, conquering world after world in their sector of the galaxy. 3 hours later, Sarah's communication screen lit up with the face of Admiral James Morrison, commander of Earth's 3rd Fleet. His weathered face looked grim, but his eyes burned with determination. "Commander Chen, I've reviewed the message. The situation is being discussed at the highest levels, but I wanted to speak with you directly." "What's your assessment?" Sarah had been thinking about nothing else since the message arrived. "Sir, the Zalani gave us 7 days. By the time we received the message, 3 months had already passed. They may already be gone." "Perhaps," Morrison acknowledged, "but perhaps not. The Karathi like to take their time, savoring the fear they create. Our intelligence suggests they often extend deadlines to maximize psychological impact. There's a chance the Zalani still survive." "And if they do?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Then they're about to learn that humanity doesn't abandon those who cry for help. I'm mobilizing the 3rd Fleet. We'll be at your position in 18 hours. Prepare your station to serve as a forward base." The connection ended, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The 3rd Fleet was no small force. If Morrison was bringing them all, Earth was taking this seriously. Over the next 18 hours, Vigilant Eye became a hive of activity. Supply shuttles arrived with provisions, ammunition, and fuel. The station's modest defensive capabilities were upgraded with additional weapon platforms. Most importantly, the quantum communication array was enhanced to maintain contact with Earth across the vast distance they would be traveling. When the 3rd Fleet arrived, Sarah understood the full scope of humanity's response. 64 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. At the center was the flagship, UES Retribution, a kilometer-long dreadnought bristling with weapons. Surrounding it were battlecruisers, destroyers, frigates, and support vessels. It was the largest gathering of human military might Sarah had ever witnessed. Admiral Morrison invited her aboard the Retribution for the mission briefing. The conference room was packed with ship captains, squadron leaders, and tactical officers. Morrison stood at the front, a holographic display showing their route to Zalani space. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to undertake something unprecedented in human history. We're going to the aid of a species we've never met, against an enemy we've never fought. The journey will take us 6 days at maximum FTL. We have no idea what we'll find when we arrive. Captain Rodriguez of the battlecruiser Thunderstrike raised his hand. Sir, what are our rules of engagement? Simple, Morrison replied. We protect the innocent. If the Karathi have already taken the planet, we liberate it. If they're still threatening the Zalani, we stop them, but we go in with the intent to save lives, not just to fight. Remember, we're representing all of humanity out there. Sarah listened as the briefing continued, covering logistics, battle formations, and contingency plans. What struck her most was the determination in every face present. These men and women were ready to travel hundreds of light years to save complete strangers, simply because they had asked for help. As the meeting concluded, Morrison pulled Sarah aside. Commander, I want you on my bridge for this operation. Your station picked up the signal. It seems fitting you should see this through. It would be an honor, Admiral. 6 days of faster-than-light travel passed in a blur of preparations and drills. The fleet practiced combat maneuvers, refined their tactics, and studied everything they knew about Karathi technology and battle doctrine. The enemy favored overwhelming force and terror tactics, using massive dreadnoughts to pummel worlds into submission. As they neared Zalani space, tension mounted throughout the fleet. Would they arrive to find a conquered world, a dead one, or would they actually have a chance to make a difference? The fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Zalani system, sensors immediately scanning for threats. What they found made Sarah's heart race. The planet still gleamed blue and green, clearly inhabitable. More importantly, a Karathi fleet hung in orbit. 30 ships, including 2 of their feared dreadnoughts. They're still here, Morrison said quietly. We're not too late. The tactical display showed Karathi ships arranged in a blockade formation around the planet. Energy readings indicated their weapons were powered but not actively firing. They were waiting, maintaining their siege. Sir, we're being hailed by the lead Karathi vessel, the communications officer reported. On screen. The face that appeared was vaguely reptilian, with scaled skin and eyes that held no warmth. The Karathi commander spoke in accented English, clearly using a translation system. Unknown vessels, this is Supreme Commander Vex of the Karathi Empire. You have entered restricted space. State your purpose. Morrison stood, his posture military straight. Supreme Commander, I am Admiral James Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. We're here in response to a distress call from the Zalani people. We request that you withdraw your forces and cease your threats against them. Vex's expression might have been amusement, though it was hard to tell on his alien features. The Zalani are subjects of the Empire. Their resources belong to us. Their fate is ours to decide. You have no authority here, human. We have the authority of conscience, Morrison replied, and the firepower to enforce it. You have 1 hour to begin your withdrawal. The Karathi commander made a sound that might have been laughter. You would risk war with the Empire for strangers? For people you have never met? Yes, Morrison said simply. We would. The transmission ended abruptly. Morrison turned to his bridge crew. Battle stations, all ships, prepare for combat. But no one fires unless fired upon. We gave them an hour, and we'll honor it. Sarah watched the tactical display as the human fleet spread into battle formation. The Retribution took point, its massive hull shielding smaller vessels. Fighter squadrons launched from carriers, taking up screening positions. The tension was palpable as minutes ticked by. 30 minutes into the hour, sensors detected movement on the planet's surface. Shuttles were launching, heading for the Karathi ships. Sarah's heart sank. Were the Karathi taking hostages? But then the communications officer spoke up. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's not Karathi. Put it through. The screen filled with an image that took Sarah's breath away. The being looking back at them was beautiful in an alien way, with delicate features, large eyes that seemed to hold starlight, and skin that shimmered with subtle colors. "I am Prime Speaker Zalara of the Zalani people," she said, her voice musical even through the translator. "Are you truly here to help us?" Morrison stepped forward. "We are, Prime Speaker. We heard your call and we came." Tears, or what appeared to be tears, ran down Zalara's face. "We had given up hope. When the Karathi granted us one more day to consider their demands, we thought it was merely to prolong our agony, but our deep space sensors detected your approach. Is it true? Will you stand with us?" "We will stand with you," Morrison confirmed. "No one should face extinction alone." The connection with Zalara was interrupted by an urgent report from the tactical officer. "Admiral, the Karathi are powering weapons. All ships defensive positions," Morrison commanded. "Shields to maximum." The space around the planet erupted into chaos as the Karathi opened fire. Energy beams lanced out from their dreadnoughts, striking the Retribution's shields in brilliant flashes of light. The human fleet responded with precision, their weapons targeting the Karathi ship's weapon systems and engines rather than going for killing blows. Sarah gripped her station as the Retribution shook under impact. The human dreadnought's shields held, but she could see the power readings dropping with each hit. "Thunderstrike and Lightning's Hammer concentrate fire on the lead dreadnought's weapons arrays," Morrison ordered calmly. "Fighter squadrons, keep those Karathi fighters off our destroyers." The battle was joined in earnest. Human ships danced through space, using superior maneuverability to avoid the worst of the Karathi fire while delivering precise strikes. The Karathi favored brute force, their massive ships pouring out tremendous firepower but lacking the coordination of the human fleet. Sarah watched in awe as humanity's forces worked in perfect synchronization. Destroyers conducted hit-and-run attacks, drawing fire away from the larger ships. Frigates provided point defense, their rapid-fire weapons creating walls of protective fire. The carriers stayed back, their fighter squadrons swarming Karathi vessels like angry hornets. The tide began to turn when the Thunderstrike scored a direct hit on the lead Karathi dreadnought's main weapon. The massive gun exploded in a shower of debris, leaving the ship significantly weakened. "Sir, the second Karathi dreadnought is trying to break through our lines toward the planet," the tactical officer called out. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "They're going for the Zalani. All ships in Grid 7, intercept. Do not let them reach the planet." A squadron of human destroyers raced to intercept, placing themselves between the Karathi ship and the world below. They paid for their bravery, 2 of them taking severe damage, but they held the line. Throughout the battle, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Despite having superior firepower in many respects, the human fleet was being careful not to destroy the Karathi ships entirely. They targeted weapons and engines, disabling rather than annihilating. "Admiral," she said during a brief lull, "we could end this faster if we targeted their reactors." Morrison never took his eyes off the tactical display. "We could, Commander, but what message would that send? That humanity solves problems through extinction? No. We're here to save lives, not end them unnecessarily." The battle raged for another hour before the inevitable became clear. The Karathi fleet was being systematically disabled. Their weapons fell silent one by one, their engines sputtered and died. Soon, only a handful of their ships remained combat-capable. It was then that Supreme Commander Vex appeared on screen again. His scaled face showed what might have been disbelief. "You fight to disable, not destroy. Why?" Morrison stepped forward. "Because we value life, Supreme Commander, even yours. Order your remaining ships to stand down. And this ends now. And if we refuse, then we'll disable the rest of your fleet and tow you back to Karathi space. Your choice." There was a long pause. On the tactical display, Sarah could see the remaining Karathi ships holding position, weapons still powered. The moment stretched out, tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Vex spoke. "All Karathi vessels, stand down, deactivate weapons, and prepare for withdrawal." A cheer went up across the human fleet, but Morrison raised his hand for silence. "Supreme Commander, understand this. The Zalani are under humanity's protection now. Any future aggression against them will be met with swift response. Do I make myself clear?" "Abundantly," Vex replied, his tone bitter. "We will inform the Empire of your intervention." "Please do," Morrison said. "Let them know that humanity stands ready to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The communication ended, and Morrison turned to his bridge crew. "Maintain alert status until all Karathi vessels have left the system. Dispatch medical teams to our damaged ships. And someone get me a channel to the Zalani. They're probably wondering what just happened." Sarah moved to the viewport, watching as the disabled Karathi ships slowly powered up their engines and began limping away. In the distance, the planet of the Zalani gleamed peacefully, no longer under threat. They had done it. They had traveled 800 light-years to answer a cry for help, and they had succeeded. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had just learned that humanity would not stand idle while others suffered. The real work was about to begin. Prime Speaker Zalara stood in the Grand Council chamber of her people, watching the holographic display that showed the human fleet maintaining protective positions around their world. 3 days had passed since the battle, and still she found it hard to believe. When they had sent their desperate message into the void, it had been an act of pure hope, like throwing a bottle into an endless ocean. Ambassador David Park adjusted his universal translator one more time before entering the chamber. As humanity's most experienced first contact specialist, he had been rushed from Earth the moment the battle ended. Now, walking beside Admiral Morrison and Commander Chen, he prepared to make official contact with the species humanity had just saved. The doors opened, revealing a chamber of breathtaking beauty. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. But it was the Zalani themselves that truly captured David's attention. They were humanoid in basic structure, but moved with a grace that seemed to defy physics. Their skin had that shimmer he'd seen in the transmissions, shifting between subtle hues of blue, silver, and pearl. Zalara stepped forward, and David noticed she stood roughly 6 feet tall, with elongated limbs and fingers that had an extra joint. Her eyes were larger than human proportions, and they seemed to hold depths of wisdom and sadness. "Welcome to Zalani Prime," she said, her translated voice carrying musical undertones that the device couldn't fully capture. "I am Zalara, chosen speaker for our people. These are the members of our Elder Council." She gestured to 12 other Zalani arranged in a semicircle. Each bowed in a flowing motion that reminded David of water. "I am Ambassador David Park," he replied, offering a careful bow in return. "With me are Admiral Morrison, who led your rescue, and Commander Chen, who first heard your call. We are honored to meet you." Zalara's eyes, which David now noticed had flecks of gold in their depths, filled with that alien equivalent of tears again. "You came. Across the vastness of space you heard our cry and you came. How do we even begin to thank you?" "No thanks are necessary," Morrison said. "We did what anyone should do when they hear a call for help." One of the Elder Council, introduced as Scholar Venn, made a gesture that might have been disagreement. "With respect, Admiral, that is not true. In our 3,000 years of spaceflight, we have encountered 43 other species. Not one has ever responded to another's distress without expectation of payment or alliance. What you have done is unprecedented." David filed that information away. 43 species known to the Zilani could provide invaluable data for humanity's understanding of the galaxy. Perhaps we could sit and discuss our respective peoples, David suggested. There is much we could learn from each other. The next hours passed in fascinating exchange. The Zilani, David learned, were pacifists not by choice, but by nature. Their entire evolutionary path had developed toward cooperation and harmony. They possessed no weapons because the concept of intentionally harming another being was almost physically painful to them. "We are empaths," Zalara explained. "We feel the emotions of those around us. Pain inflicted on another is pain we experience ourselves. This is why the Karathi's threats were so effective. They would make us watch as they destroyed one of our colony worlds. The psychic backlash killed thousands of us who never left this planet." Commander Chen, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "How did you develop space travel without weapons? Even for mining asteroids or clearing debris?" "We use what you might call controlled gravity fields," Scholar Venn replied. "We move objects. We don't destroy them. Our ships can redirect asteroids, collect resources, build habitats. But we cannot, literally cannot, create devices intended to cause harm." David found himself fascinated by the implications. A species that had achieved interstellar travel through purely peaceful means. Their technology must have developed along completely different paths than humanity's. "The Karathi knew this about us," another elder, Keeper Sal, added bitterly. "They knew we could not fight back. That is why they targeted us. We have resources they want. Our crystal technology, our gravity manipulation, our empathic abilities which they believe can be weaponized." "Weaponized empathy?" Morrison's expression darkened. "They wanted to use our people as interrogators," Zalara explained, her shimmer dimming to darker hues. "Force us to extract information through emotional manipulation. The very thought—" She shuddered, and David noticed all the Zilani in the room reacted similarly. Over the following days, as the human fleet maintained its protective vigil, David worked to establish formal diplomatic relations. He learned that the Zilani governed through consensus, their empathic abilities allowing them to literally feel the needs and desires of their population. Decisions were made not through debate, but through a kind of emotional harmonization. It was during one of these sessions that Zalara asked a question that had clearly been troubling her. "Ambassador Park, there is something we do not understand. Your people are clearly capable of violence. We saw this in the battle. Yet you use that capability to protect, not conquer. How is this possible?" David had been expecting this question. "Humanity has a complicated relationship with violence," he admitted. "We evolved on a world where cooperation and competition both played roles in our survival. We can be aggressive, yes, but we've learned, through much trial and error, to channel that aggression toward protecting what we value." "And you value life?" "We value justice," David clarified. "We value freedom. We value the right of every species to exist without fear. Sometimes, unfortunately, protecting those values requires force." Scholar Venn leaned forward, his shimmer brightening with curiosity. "Your history, would you share it with us? We wish to understand how a species capable of war chose to use that capability for protection." David looked at Morrison and Chen, then nodded. Over the next several hours, he gave the Zilani a condensed version of human history. He didn't hide humanity's dark periods, the wars, the genocides, the times when they had failed to live up to their ideals. But he also shared the moments of triumph, the times when humans had stood up for what was right, when they had overcome their worst natures to build something better. The Zilani listened in fascinated horror and admiration. Their empathic abilities meant they felt echoes of the emotions David described. Several times he had to pause as they processed particularly difficult passages. "You nearly destroyed yourselves," Keeper Sal observed when David finished. "Multiple times. We did, David agreed. But we learned. Each time we pulled back from the brink and tried to do better. We're not perfect, far from it. But we keep trying. Zalara stood and walked to the chamber's vast window, gazing out at the human ships visible in orbit. And now you extend that protection to others. When we developed faster-than-light travel and realized we weren't alone, David said, joining her at the window, we had a choice. We could be conquerors, like the Karathi, or we could be something else. We chose to be protectors. But at what cost? Zalara asked. Your ships, your people? You risked them for strangers. Commander Chen spoke up from across the room. With respect, Prime Speaker, you're not strangers anymore. The moment you asked for help, you became someone we had a responsibility to protect. The meetings continued for days, with both species learning from each other. The Zilani shared their crystal technology, showing the humans how they grew computational matrices that made their computers look primitive. They demonstrated their gravity manipulation, casually lifting multi-ton objects with devices the size of a pen. In return, the humans shared their defensive technologies. Not weapons. The Zilani still couldn't bring themselves to even look at those directly, but shields, armor, early warning systems. Technologies that could protect without harming. It was during one of these technical exchanges that urgent news arrived. A human courier ship dropped out of FTL with a priority message for Admiral Morrison. David watched the Admiral's face darken as he read it. What is it? David asked. The Karathi, Morrison replied. They've filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council. David's heart sank. The Galactic Council was a loose confederation of the galaxy's major powers. Humanity had been aware of its existence, but had never made formal contact. What kind of complaint? They're claiming we violated interstellar law by interfering in illegal resource acquisition. Morrison's voice dripped with disgust. Apparently, by their laws, the Zilani's failure to develop weapons technology marks them as a subject species. Scholar Venn, who had been listening, made a sound of distress. The Galactic Council has never intervened on our behalf before. They consider us too weak to matter. Well, they're about to learn differently, Morrison said firmly. He turned to David. Ambassador, how quickly can you prepare for a trip to the Council? I'll need full briefings on all known Council species and their protocols, David said, his mind already racing. And we'll need Zilani representatives with us. This affects them directly. I will go, Zalara said immediately. My people need to be heard. Over the next week, preparations were made at breakneck speed. 3 human warships would escort their diplomatic vessel to the Council station. The Zilani provided data on the various Council species. The ancient Etherians who claimed to have been spacefaring for 1,000,000 years, the hive-minded collective that spoke as one voice, the silicon-based architects who built impossible structures in space. As they prepared to depart, something remarkable happened. Other human ships began arriving at Zilani Prime. Not military vessels, but cargo haulers, science ships, medical vessels. The rescue had captured humanity's imagination, and people wanted to help. We brought medical supplies, Captain Foster of the cargo ship Hope's Journey explained. Heard these folks were empaths. Figured they might need help dealing with the trauma from the Karathi threats. A science vessel arrived with a proposal for cultural exchange. Artists came wanting to learn about Zilani crystal singing. Engineers wanted to study gravity manipulation. What had started as a military rescue was becoming something more, a true meeting of civilizations. David stood with Zalara in the spaceport, watching human and Zilani working side by side to unload supplies. Your people are remarkable, Zalara said. They come not as conquerors or exploiters, but as friends. We've learned that the universe is a big, lonely place, David replied. Finding friends out here, that's worth protecting. As their ship prepared for departure to face the Galactic Council, David received one last message from Earth. The United Earth Assembly had voted unanimously to offer the Zilani a formal alliance. Not a subordinate relationship, not a protectorate, but a true partnership between equals. When David shared the news with Zalara, her shimmer cycled through a rainbow of colors he'd learned indicated joy. "Partners," she repeated. "Yes, we have much to learn from each other." The journey to the Galactic Council would take 2 weeks. During that time, David worked with Zalara and her companions to prepare their case. The Karathi would argue that might made right, that the Zilani's pacifism made them natural subjects for stronger species. Humanity would argue something different, that diversity of thought and culture was what made the galaxy rich, that every species had something unique to contribute, and that the right to exist peacefully was fundamental. "What if the Council rules against us?" one of the younger Zilani representatives asked during a planning session. Morrison, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Then the Council will learn what the Karathi learned. Humanity doesn't abandon its friends." As they traveled through hyperspace toward their destination, David found himself reflecting on how much had changed. A month ago, humanity had been alone in their sector of space, aware of other species but having no formal contact. Now they were preparing to stand before the galaxy's major powers as defenders of a people they'd just met. The ship's observation deck became a popular gathering place for humans and Zilani alike. The two species were learning to communicate beyond words. The Zilani's empathic abilities letting them sense human emotions, while humans learned to read the color shifts that indicated Zilani feelings. One evening, David found Commander Chen standing alone at the observation port, watching the streaked stars of hyperspace. "Thinking deep thoughts, Commander?" Chen smiled slightly. "Just wondering how different things might have been. What if we hadn't picked up their signal? What if we'd decided it wasn't our problem?" "But we did pick it up," David pointed out, "and we did decide it was our problem." "Yeah," Chen agreed. "I guess that's what makes us human. We hear someone crying for help, and we can't just walk away." As they neared the Galactic Council station, final preparations intensified. The Zilani chose their representatives carefully, not just officials, but artists, scientists, teachers, people who could show the Council the full richness of their culture. The human delegation was similarly diverse: military officers to show strength, diplomats to negotiate, scientists to demonstrate humanity's contributions to galactic knowledge, and ordinary citizens to show that humanity's decision to help had been a collective one. On the last day before arrival, Zalara found David in his quarters, going over his notes one final time. "May I enter?" she asked. "Of course." She moved with that flowing grace to sit across from him. "I need you to know something before we face the Council. My people are empaths, as you know. We feel what others feel." "Yes?" "When your ships first arrived, when we were still cowering under Karathi threats, I reached out with my abilities to sense your intentions. Do you know what I felt from your Admiral Morrison, from Commander Chen, from all your people?" David shook his head. "Determination," Zalara said, her shimmer brightening. "Not aggression, not desire for conquest or reward, just pure determination to help. It was beautiful, and it gave my people hope for the first time in months." "We're glad we could help," David said, touched by her words. "You don't understand," Zalara continued. "In all our contacts with other species, we have never felt that before. Self-interest, yes. Calculated alliance building, certainly. But pure altruism, never. Your species may be young to the stars, David Park, but you carry something special. Don't let the Council convince you otherwise." The next morning, they dropped out of hyperspace to face whatever judgment awaited them. The Galactic Council station hung before them like a crystalline flower in space, beautiful and intimidating in equal measure. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity stood for. The Galactic Council chamber was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It existed in what the Ethereans called folded space, a pocket dimension where the laws of physics bent to accommodate representatives from radically different environments. Aquatic species swam through water-filled sections that somehow bordered areas of methane atmosphere without mixing. Gravity varied from zone to zone, allowing each species to exist in comfort. Ambassador David Park stood in the section designated for oxygen-breathing humanoids, Admiral Morrison to his right, and Prime Speaker Zalara to his left. Around them, the chamber held representatives from over 100 spacefaring civilizations. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. At the center of the chamber, elevated above all others, sat the Council Primarchs, representatives of the 5 founding species. The ancient Etherean floated in its energy field, its form barely visible as shifting patterns of light. The collective's 1,000 bodies moved in perfect synchronization. The architects had constructed their speaking platform from living metal that constantly reshaped itself. The void dancers existed partially in another dimension, flickering in and out of visibility. And finally, the Karathi representative, not Supreme Commander Vex, but an even more imposing figure introduced as War Master Crane. The Etherean spoke first, its voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The Council convenes to address the complaint brought by the Karathi Empire against the United Earth Government. War Master Crane, present your case. Crane rose from his position, his scales reflecting the chamber's shifting lights. Honored Primarchs, the case is simple. The Zalani are a resource species, incapable of defending themselves. By all laws of nature and civilization, they exist to serve stronger species. The humans interfered with a legal acquisition, destroying Karathi property and threatening Imperial forces. We demand compensation and immediate human withdrawal from Zalani space. David noticed how Crane used the word resource instead of people. It was a deliberate dehumanization, or de-alienization, of an entire species. The collective spoke next, its 1,000 voices creating an eerie harmony. The Karathi speak of laws of nature. We are curious. What laws are these? We know of no universal statute that declares one sapient species the property of another. The law of strength, Crane replied without hesitation. The Zalani cannot fight. They chose evolution toward weakness. Such choices have consequences. The architect's platform reformed into a speaking podium. Define weakness. The Zalani achieved interstellar flight. They developed technologies unknown to many species present. Their crystal matrices surpass even our computational abilities. In what way are they weak? They cannot defend themselves, Crane insisted. Power is the ultimate measure of a species' right to exist independently. The void dancers flickered more rapidly. A sign David had learned indicated agitation. By this logic, any species that develops beyond violence becomes subject to those who have not. This seems counterproductive to galactic advancement. It was then that the Etherean turned its attention to the human delegation. We would hear from humanity. You are new to the galactic stage, yet you presume to interfere in established patterns. Explain yourselves. David stepped forward, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes upon him. He had rehearsed this moment, but now, facing the assembled powers of the galaxy, his prepared words felt inadequate. So he spoke from the heart. Honored Primarchs, distinguished representatives, my name is David Park. I speak for humanity, but more than that, I speak for a simple principle, that the cry of those in need creates an obligation in those who can help. He paused, letting his words settle in the translation systems. The Karathi claim the Zalani are weak because they cannot fight. But I ask you, which requires more strength? To evolve beyond violence as the Zalani have done, or to remain trapped in patterns of conquest and exploitation? War Master Crane's scales rattled, a sign of anger. Pretty words from a species barely a century into space travel. What do you know of galactic realities? We know enough, Admiral Morrison said, stepping forward to stand beside David. We know that might without morality is mere tyranny. We know that diversity of thought and culture enriches all. And we know that standing by while innocents suffer is a choice we refuse to make. The Etherean's form shifted, patterns of light displaying what might have been interest. You speak of morality. This is not a concept often invoked in this chamber. Most species operate on more practical considerations. Then perhaps it's time that changed, David said. He gestured to Zalara. Prime Speaker, would you share with the Council what the Karathi truly wanted from your people? Zalara stepped forward, her natural grace evident even in the strange physics of the chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried the harmonics that the translator couldn't fully capture, but which affected everyone present on an almost subliminal level. The Karathi wanted our children, she said simply, not for labor, not for resources, but for experimentation. They believed our empathic abilities could be extracted, weaponized, used to create perfect interrogators and torturers. They wanted to take what makes us who we are, our ability to feel another's pain, and turn it into a tool for causing more pain. A ripple of reaction went through the chamber. Even species without traditional emotions seemed disturbed by this revelation. Is this true? The collective asked, its 1,000 voices directed at Crane. The War Master's posture remained defiant. The Karathi Empire uses all resources efficiently. If the Zalani possess useful abilities, it is logical to utilize them. You would turn empathy into a weapon? The Void Dancer's question came from multiple dimensions at once, creating an echo effect that made several representatives flinch. We would turn everything into weapons, Crane replied. That is why the Karathi are strong, why we expand while others stagnate. David seized the moment. And there you have it, honored Primarchs, the fundamental question before this council. Do we accept a galaxy where the only measure of worth is the ability to destroy? Or do we choose something better? The architect's platform shifted into a new configuration. The human makes an interesting point. Several species present have evolved beyond physical conflict. Are we to accept that this evolution makes them subject to those who have not? Yes. Crane's response was immediate. That is the natural order. Natural, the Etherean mused, its light patterns shifting thoughtfully. An interesting concept from a species that uses technology to overcome every natural limitation. Tell us, War Master, is your ship's faster than light drive natural? Are your weapons, your life extension treatments? Crane had no immediate answer to that. David pressed on. Humanity offers an alternative. We propose that each species be judged not by their capacity for violence, but by their contributions to galactic civilization. The Zalani's crystal technology could revolutionize computing for all species. Their gravity manipulation could make construction in space infinitely easier. Their empathic abilities, rather than being weaponized, could help resolve conflicts peacefully. These are strengths, not weaknesses. And if the Council rejects this philosophy? The collective asked. If we uphold the Karathi's claim? Admiral Morrison's voice was calm, but carried steel underneath. Then humanity will continue to protect the Zalani and any other species that asks for our help. The chamber erupted in discussion. Species conferred with their delegations, translation systems working overtime to convey concepts between radically different modes of thought. David noticed several smaller species, those who, like the Zalani, had little military might, paying close attention. The Etherean called for order. We will now hear from any others who wish to speak on this matter. What happened next surprised everyone, including David. A representative from a species called the Dulians stood. They were a small, furry people who looked almost comically non-threatening. "The Delians wish to speak," their representative said in a high, piping voice. 50 cycles ago, the Karathi came to our world. We, like the Zalani, had no weapons. Unlike the Zalani, we had no one to call for help. Now, 60% of our population labors in Karathi mines. Our children forget our songs, our language, our ways. We are becoming nothing more than resources." Another species stood, the Valan, aquatic beings in environmental suits. "We confirm the Dulian's account. The Karathi have systematically targeted peaceful species for decades. The Council has done nothing because it was deemed natural selection. We support humanity's position." One by one, other species stood. Not the powerful ones. They remained silent. But the smaller civilizations, the ones who had evolved beyond conflict or had never developed it in the first place, each told similar stories of Karathi aggression, of worlds threatened or enslaved. War Master Crane watched with visible disgust. The weak band together. It changes nothing. They still cannot stand against true strength. "Perhaps not," David said. "But they don't stand alone anymore. Humanity's message to this galaxy is simple. No one stands alone. Attack one peaceful species, face humanity's fleet, threaten the weak, answer to the strong who choose to protect rather than exploit." The Void Dancers spoke again. "You would make yourselves guardians of the galaxy? That is ambitious for such a young species." "Not guardians," David corrected. "Partners, protectors when needed, friends hopefully, but never conquerors, never exploiters. We've seen what that path leads to in our own history. We choose differently." The Ethereans' light patterns had been shifting throughout the discussion, and now they settled into something that might have been decision. "The Council will deliberate. All parties will be notified of our decision." The assembly was dismissed, and various species began filing out. David noticed many of the smaller civilizations' representatives approaching the human delegation, but they were intercepted by their handlers and ushered away. Still, the looks they gave were full of something that transcended species: hope. In their assigned quarters, the human and Zalani delegations waited. The Council's deliberations could take days or even weeks. Morrison used the time to check in with the fleet still protecting Zalani Prime. Reports were positive. No Karathi activity, and human merchant ships continued to arrive, drawn by the prospect of peaceful trade. Zalara spent much of the time teaching David and others about Zalani meditation techniques, ways to calm the mind that didn't rely on their empathic abilities. It helped pass the time and deepened the growing friendship between the species. 3 days later, they were summoned back to the chamber. The atmosphere was different this time, charged with an energy David couldn't quite identify. The Primarchs sat in their elevated positions, but now there were more occupied seats in the General Assembly. Word had spread about the nature of the debate. The Etherean spoke without preamble. "The Council has reached a decision. The matter before us extends beyond the specific complaint of the Karathi. It speaks to the fundamental nature of our galactic civilization." David held his breath. For too long, this Council has operated on the principle of non-interference. We have allowed the strong to prey upon those they deem weak, calling it natural. But as has been pointed out, nothing about our civilizations is natural. We have all chosen to transcend our original natures in various ways. The light patterns shifted, and somehow David got the sense the Etherean was looking directly at him. Humanity presents a new paradigm. Strength used not for conquest but for protection. Evolution not just of technology, but of ethics. It is intriguing. War Master Crane stood abruptly. "The Council cannot seriously be considering—" "Silence," the collective said in its 1,000 voices. The Primarchs speak. The Etherian continued. We rule as follows. The Zilani are recognized as a sovereign species with full rights under galactic law. The Karathi claim is rejected. Furthermore, we establish a new principle. No species may be subjected or enslaved based solely on their inability or unwillingness to engage in violence. The chamber erupted. Cheers from some quarters, angry protests from others. Crane's scales had turned a dark crimson, a color David had learned indicated rage. This is unprecedented, the War Master snarled. You overturn millions of years of precedent for these newcomers? We evolve, the architect said simply. That is what sapient species do. We evolve or we stagnate. Humanity has shown us a new path. It remains to be seen if we have the wisdom to walk it. The Void Dancers added their voice. Let it be known that any aggression against the Zilani or other peaceful species will be brought before this council. The age of unchecked predation is ending. And if the Karathi Empire refuses to accept this ruling, Crane demanded. Admiral Morrison stood. Then the Karathi Empire will learn what humanity learned long ago, that there's always someone stronger, and true strength lies not in conquest, but in knowing when not to fight. The formal session ended, but the real work was just beginning. Over the following weeks, a stream of representatives from smaller species approached the human delegation. Each had stories of oppression, requests for aid, offers of trade, and cultural exchange. We've opened a floodgate, Morrison observed one evening as they reviewed the latest batch of requests. Yes, we have, David agreed. The question is, are we ready for what comes next? Zalara, who had become an integral part of their planning sessions, offered her perspective. You have given hope to those who had none. That is a precious gift, but also a heavy responsibility. She was right. Within a month, humanity found itself at the center of a growing alliance of peaceful species. The Dulians requested help liberating their enslaved population. The Valen wanted assistance developing defensive technologies. A dozen other species sought trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and most importantly, protection. Earth's government worked overtime to establish new frameworks. The Earth Defense Fleet was expanded and reorganized into the Allied Protection Force, with ships and personnel from multiple species. The Zilani contributed their gravity manipulation technology, making human ships faster and more maneuverable. The Dulians, once freed from Karathi control, revealed remarkable abilities in miniaturization and efficiency. Each species brought something unique to the alliance. Not everyone was happy with the new order. The Karathi rattled their sabers, conducting military exercises near Allied territory. Other predatory species grumbled about human interference in the natural order, but they hesitated to act directly, uncertain of how far humanity and its new allies might go. 6 months after the council ruling, David stood once again on the observation deck of a ship, but this time it wasn't a human vessel. The Harmony of Souls was a joint project, built with human engineering, Zilani crystal technology, Dulian miniaturization, and innovations from a dozen other species. It served as a mobile embassy, traveling between worlds to strengthen the bonds of the Alliance. Commander Chen, now serving as military liaison to the Allied fleet, joined him at the viewport. Remember when this all started with a single distress signal? Seems like a lifetime ago, David replied. Outside, he could see a mixed flotilla, human warships flying alongside Zilani crystal ships, Dulian scouts, and others. Think we bit off more than we can chew? Chen considered the question. Maybe. But what was the alternative? Let the Zilani fall? Turn our backs on everyone else who needed help? She shook her head. No, we did the right thing. It's just the right thing has consequences. Those consequences continued to unfold. The Karathi, frustrated by their loss of easy targets, finally overplayed their hand. They attacked a human colony ship en route to establish a joint settlement with the Valen. They apparently believed humanity wouldn't risk full-scale war over a single ship. They were wrong. The response was swift and decisive. The Allied Protection Force, led by Admiral Morrison, struck at 3 Karathi slave worlds simultaneously. But instead of conquering, they liberated. Duline prisoners were freed and offered transportation home. Other enslaved species were given the same choice. The Karathi military installations were destroyed, but civilian populations were left unharmed. The message was clear. Aggression would be met with force, but humanity and its allies would not become what they fought against. War Master Crane himself led the Karathi response, bringing their grand fleet to what he intended to be a decisive battle. What he found instead was something the Karathi military doctrine had never prepared for. An enemy that fought not for conquest but for protection, and allies bound not by fear, but by hope. The Battle of Kepler Station, as it came to be known, lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Karathi Grand Fleet was in ruins, but again, disabled rather than destroyed. Crane's own dreadnought was towed back to Karathi space by human tugs, a humiliation that spoke louder than any destruction could have. In the aftermath, something remarkable happened. Younger Karathi, those who had grown up seeing only the endless cycle of conquest and subjugation, began to question their empire's ways. Revolution came not from outside, but from within, as Karathi citizens demanded change. It would take years for the Karathi Empire to transform, and the process was far from smooth. But the seed had been planted, the idea that strength could mean something more than the ability to destroy. 5 years after that first distress signal, Ambassador David Park stood before the Galactic Council once again. But this time he wasn't defending humanity's actions. He was introducing the newest member of the Allied Protection Force, a reformed Karathi republic that had chosen cooperation over conquest. The galaxy had changed. Not completely. There were still predatory species, still conflicts and challenges. But the balance had shifted. The voices of peaceful species now had weight, backed by those willing to stand for them. Zalara, now serving as the Alliance's chief cultural officer, stood beside him. Her shimmer was bright with satisfaction as she watched former enemies working together. "Your species is still young," she said quietly, "but you've taught us all something valuable. Sometimes the youngest voices carry the most important messages." David smiled, thinking of how far they'd come. "We just answered a cry for help. Everything else followed from that simple choice." "Simple choices often have the most profound consequences," Zalara observed. As the council session continued, with species after species reporting on cooperative ventures and shared achievements, David reflected on humanity's new role in the galaxy. They hadn't sought to be protectors, hadn't planned to reshape galactic civilization. But when someone had cried out in the darkness, they had answered, and in answering, they had lit a light that would shine across the stars for generations to come. The age of unchecked predation was ending. The age of protection had begun. And in every corner of the galaxy, those who had once cowered in fear now looked to the stars with hope, knowing that if they called for help, someone would answer. Humanity's greatest adventure had only just begun.